Okay, in your notebook, I want you to write triangles. Okay, the first thing that you need to know about triangles is that they're made up of 180 degrees. Now, we can classify triangles two different ways. The first way we're going to classify triangles is by their angles. The first type of triangle based on the angles is called an acute triangle. Now, in an acute triangle, that means all angles are acute angles. I always think the easiest way to remember what an acute angle is, typically we think of little babies as being acute. Okay, so acute angles are all angles less than 90 degrees. The next one is a right triangle. And in a right triangle, there is one right angle and two acute angles. And then the third type of triangle based on the angles would be an obtuse triangle. An obtuse triangle has one obtuse angle and then two acute angles. And the way that I remember obtuse angles is many, many years ago, the basketball coach at East Juniata, his name was Toos. Okay, and Toos was a big fella, a big gentleman. And so, I think of obtuse, when I hear obtuse, I think of Toos being a large gentleman. Okay, Landon.
I know the other kinds.
Well, that's fine. We'll talk about them later. Okay, now, is it possible to have a right angle and an obtuse angle in a triangle? Is it possible to have a right angle and an obtuse angle all in the same triangle? The answer is no, because a right angle is 90 degrees. An obtuse angle is any angle greater than 90 degrees. So what is the smallest obtuse angle? Wyatt?
91.
91 degrees. So if we add 90 plus 91, that gives me 181 degrees. But there's only how many degrees in a triangle? 180. With those two angles combined, we're already over the 180 degrees. And then we still have a third angle to go. So it is not possible to have a right triangle and an obtuse triangle in the same triangle. Is it possible to have two obtuse angles in the same triangle? No, because the smallest obtuse angle is 91 degrees. Well, if you have two of the smallest ones, right there, that is 182 degrees. And you still have that third angle, and we're still already over the 180 degrees in a triangle. Okay? So that is why a right triangle has one right angle, and all the rest must be acute. And likewise, for an obtuse triangle, it has one obtuse angle, and all the rest must be acute. Now, we can also identify triangles by their sides. The first type of triangle based on their sides is a scaling triangle. Now, for a scaling triangle, all sides are different. The way that I remember a scaling triangle, scales are like the fingerprints on a fish. Okay? That's how I think about it. Scales are like fingerprints on a fish. But what do you know about everybody's fingerprints? Everybody's fingerprints are different. And so, a scaling triangle, scales are like fingerprints. They're all different. All sides are different. The second type of triangle is an isosceles triangle. For an isosceles triangle, two sides are the same. Now, the way I remember an isosceles triangle, isosceles starts with the letter I. How many eyes do we have? Two. So since we have two eyes, two sides are the same. And then the third type of triangle based on the sides is an equilateral triangle. And in an equilateral triangle, all sides are the same. And the way that I remember equilateral, in the word equilateral, it sounds like equal, all sides are equal. Yes.
The first one, that wouldn't make sense because if they're all different, there'd be an obtuse, a right, and a acute.
What do you mean?
Didn't you say that a right and a acute can't be in the same triangle?
A right and acute cannot be, a right angle and an acute angle cannot, a right and an obtuse, they cannot be in the same triangle because a right angle is 90 degrees, an obtuse angle is more than 90 degrees. So if you have a 90 and a 91, that's 181 degrees. So that's not possible because there's only 180 degrees in a triangle. Okay?
Okay.
All right, on the next page, quadrilateral. for a quadrilateral. They are made up of 360 degrees. Now we have many different types of quadrilaterals. The first one, we'll just call it a general quadrilateral. And a general quadrilateral is any four-sided object. So any four-sided object is called a quadrilateral. Now, probably the largest group of quadrilaterals are a parallelogram. A parallelogram, in order for it to be a parallelogram, opposite sides must be parallel. Now, in order for there to be two sets of parallel sides, the opposite sides must also be congruent. So opposite sides are parallel and congruent. And they must have two pair of congruent angles. The main thing that you're going to need to remember, though, is that for a parallelogram, opposite sides are parallel. As long as you can remember that, the rest of the things you should be able to remember, hopefully, as we do more of them. Now, the next type of quadrilateral is an example of a parallelogram. So I'm going to put this as A. Okay? So we've talked about a general quadrilateral. We've talked about a parallelogram. The next one we're going to talk about is a rectangle. The reason I put a rectangle and I labeled it letter A and indented it from a parallelogram is because a rectangle is a parallelogram. Why is a rectangle a parallelogram? Wyatt?
It has two sets of parallel sides.
Opposite sides are parallel. And so since opposite sides are parallel, a rectangle is a parallelogram. But it's a special kind of parallelogram. what makes it a special kind of parallelogram is that it has 4 right angles. So any quadrilateral that has 4 right angles is a rectangle. And since it's a rectangle, it is also a quadrilateral. Now, for it to be a rectangle, it must also have, and this goes right along with it, 2 pair congruent sides. Next, I'm going to put this as a number 1. And here's where I struggle with where I want to put 1 and where I want to put the next one. I'm going to put the next one here as a square. And I'm going to indent it a little bit from a rectangle. Because all squares are rectangles. But not every rectangle is a square. Why is a square a special kind of rectangle? Johnny?
Because all the sides are equal.
Okay. It is a rectangle because it has 4 right angles. Because it has 4 right angles, that makes it a rectangle. However, it is a special kind of rectangle because of what Johnny said. It has 4 congruent sides. Next, I'm going to put letter B. And this is a rhombus. This is my favorite math term of all time. I love the term rhombus. I love it so much that had any of my children been boys, I was trying to convince my wife that we would name the boy Rhombus. I love the term rhombus.
Rhombus.
Okay? Now, I indent the word rhombus from parallelogram because a rhombus is a parallelogram. But it is a special kind of parallelogram. First of all, it is a parallelogram because opposite sides are parallel. It is a special kind of parallelogram because it has 4 congruent sides. And it also has 2 pair congruent angles. Now, some questions that you're going to have. Because a rhombus and a square, okay, they have a lot of similarities. A rhombus has 4 congruent sides. A square has 4 congruent sides. Opposite sides are parallel. a square opposite sides are parallel. So now, a question they're going to ask you, and it would be a true-false question. Is every square a rhombus?
No.
And the answer is yes. Every square is a rhombus. Because it has 4 congruent sides. And it says here it has 2 pair of congruent angles. Well, as long as they have, you can have more than 2 pair. Okay? So a square is considered a rhombus. So if they say, is a square a rhombus, the answer is yes. Are all squares rhombuses? Yes. Now, if they say, are all rhombuses squared? The answer would be no. Because a rhombus does not have to have 4 right angles. It can have, as long as it has 2 pair of congruent angles, it is a rhombus. Okay? So all squares are rhombus, but not all rhombuses are squares. Likewise, another question they're going to ask you. Are all squares rectangles? And the answer is yes. All squares are rectangles. Are all rectangles squares? No, because a square is a special kind of rectangle, but there are other types of rectangles, ones that don't have 4 congruent sides. Another question they're going to ask you. Are all parallelograms rectangles? And the answer is no. Are all rectangles parallelograms? And the answer is yes. All rectangles are parallelograms because opposite sides are parallel. But not all parallelograms are rectangles because not all parallelograms have to have 4 right angles. Okay? So those are the types of questions that they're going to ask you when it comes time for tests or homework. Now, we have one other type of quadrilateral. And that is a trapezoid. Actually, we have 2 more types I got to talk to. A trapezoid. A trapezoid simply has 1 pair of parallel sides. Okay? So a trapezoid has 1 pair of parallel sides. The last type of quadrilateral, and this is going to probably be a new one to you, is a kite. Okay, a kite. For an object to be a kite, it has to have 2 pair congruent sides and only 1 pair of congruent angles. Now, we have certain symbols that go along with the different names. A parallelogram, you're going to write it out here beside it. A parallelogram, typically when you see this symbol, that is a symbol for a parallelogram. You can just draw it and then label a parallelogram at the bottom or whatever. Or something. Okay, a rectangle. We all know what a rectangle looks like, hopefully. Now, the symbol that they use to make sure that you realize that it is a rectangle, the symbol for a right angle is they draw a box in the corner. So anytime you see a little box like this, that means that they are right angles. A square. We all know what a square looks like. A rhombus. A lot of times you'll see a rhombus drawn like a diamond. Now, something for you to be aware of. If sides are congruent, you're going to see like little, I call them ticks. Okay? Since you see a little tick here, through this line and this line, that means that they are congruent. Now, if you see two ticks, that means the line that had the two ticks on it are congruent. Okay? For a rectangle, these are congruent, and those are congruent. For a square, all sides are congruent. For a rhombus, all sides are congruent. Now, a way to tell if the angles are congruent, you're going to see little arcs. Here's one arc, and there's one arc. Since there are one arcs, that means that they're congruent. Now, this is congruent with this, and so there are two arcs. Now for a trapezoid, trapezoids typically look like this whenever you see a symbol drawn for it. And then the kite. Okay? Where that side is congruent to that, this side is congruent to this, and those angles are congruent. Okay? Alright, get out of here, guys. Spend more time tomorrow on this.